The heart of ancient Rome was not its legions or its laws, but its sacred fire, tended day and night by a chosen few. These were the Vestal Virgins, priestesses of Vesta, the goddess of the hearth and home. They were figures of immense prestige, revered for their sacred duty, to keep the eternal flame burning, a symbol of Rome's enduring power and destiny. To be chosen as a Vestal was a rare honor, bestowed upon young girls, typically between the ages of 6 and 10, selected for their perfect physical health and noble birth. They were plucked from their families, their childhoods abruptly ended, and brought to the house of the Vestals, a luxurious but secluded palace within the Roman Forum. Here they began a 30-year commitment to the goddess. The first 10 years were dedicated to learning the complex rituals and traditions associated with Vesta. They were taught the sacred hymns, the proper ways to tend the flame, and the secret rites that were forbidden to men. They were under the strict tutelage of the senior Vestals, their days structured by prayer, study, and the meticulous performance of their duties. The middle 10 years were their active service. They were the flamekeepers, the guardians of Rome's sacred heart. Their presence at public ceremonies was essential, and their blessings were sought for important state affairs. They lived a life of privilege, with special rights and exemptions. They could own property, make wills, and even free slaves, freedoms rarely granted to women in ancient Rome. The final 10 years were spent training new recruits, passing on the ancient knowledge and ensuring the continuity of the sacred order. After 30 years of service, a Vestal was technically free to leave the order and marry. However, many chose to remain, having spent their entire adult lives within the familiar, albeit restrictive, walls of the House of the Vestals. But beneath the veneer of honor and privilege lay a terrifying constraint, a sacred vow of absolute chastity for the entire 30 years of their service. The breaking of this vow was considered an unspeakable sacrilege, a threat to the very fabric of Roman society, believed to bring divine wrath upon the city. The consequences for a Vestal who broke her vow were horrifying. She was not simply executed, that would shed sacred blood. Instead, she was entombed alive, carried in a closed litter as if for burial. She was taken outside the city walls to a small underground chamber. There she was left with a lamp, some water, bread, and a niche to lie in. The entrance was then sealed, leaving her to die a slow, suffocating death, a living sacrifice to appease the offended goddess. The selection as a Vestal, an honor sought by few families, was a double-edged sword. It offered a life of prestige and security, but it also demanded the ultimate sacrifice of personal freedom and the constant, terrifying pressure of maintaining an impossible vow for these sacred prisoners, chosen by the gods themselves. A single mistake could lead to a fate worse than death. The life of a Vestal was one of profound contradictions. They were revered above all other women, yet they lived in a state of confinement. Their home, the House of the Vestals or Atrium Vesta, was a place of immense luxury, but it was also a gilded cage, governed by an unyielding routine and a suffocating set of rules. Their day was a cycle of meticulous, sacred tasks. It began before dawn with the fetching of water from a sacred spring. This water, carried in a special vessel that could not be set down, was used for ritual purification. Then came the preparation of mola salsa, a salted flour mixture used in nearly every state sacrifice, a recipe known only to them. And of course, there was the fire, always the fire. The eternal flame had to be tended constantly, its embers never allowed to die. This routine was more than a duty, it was a form of psychological control. It left little time for personal thoughts, for desires, for the dangerous pull of the outside world. From their opulent courtyard, they could hear the roar of the Roman Forum, the shouts of merchants, the speeches of politicians, the laughter of families. They could see life, but they could not live it. They were observers of the Roman family, but could have no family of their own. Yet this isolation was paired with incredible public power. A Vestal traveling through the city in her litter had the right of way over everyone, even the consuls. A condemned criminal who happened to cross her path was automatically pardoned. They were the custodians of sacred objects and, most importantly, the wills of powerful men like Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. To harm a Vestal was to commit a capital crime. They were untouchable, but this very untouchability created an unbearable pressure. The fear of failure was constant. If the sacred fire went out, it was a terrifying omen for all of Rome, and the Vestal responsible would be taken to a dark, sealed room and scourged by the Pontifex Maximus, the high priest. It was a punishment of immense shame and pain. Even worse was the psychological weight of their vow. In a city of political intrigue, a Vestal's purity could become a weapon. An enemy could start a rumor. A simple conversation with a male cousin could be twisted into an accusation. Every man they met was a potential source of their own destruction. They were surrounded by honor and respect, but they lived in a state of constant gnawing paranoia. They were simultaneously the most powerful and the most vulnerable women in Rome. Their gilded cage protected them from the world, but it also trapped them with their own fears, where a single spark of rumor or a moment of carelessness could lead to an unspeakable end. For 30 years, a Vestal Virgin walked a tightrope of perfect purity, but she was not made of marble. She was a woman of flesh and blood, living in a world of ambition, desire, and political intrigue. What happened when the pressure became too much? What happened when a human heart defied a divine vow? It was the ultimate taboo, the crime of taboo, a secret affair. Perhaps it begins with a stolen glance during a public festival, a whispered word in a quiet temple corridor. That man could be anyone, a charismatic politician seeking influence, a handsome soldier, a childhood friend she never truly forgot. For the Vestal, such a relationship would be a terrifying dance between ecstasy and absolute dread. Every secret meeting would be a gamble with her own life, but secrets in Rome rarely stay secret for long. All it takes is one jealous rival, one slave with a loose tongue, or one political enemy looking for leverage. The accusation, once made, spreads through the city like a plague. The mood shifts instantly. The woman who was worshipped yesterday is now the object of public horror and suspicion. Her alleged crime is not just a personal failing. It is a stain on Rome itself, an act that has angered the gods and endangered the entire state. The trial is a grim religious spectacle presided over by the College of Pontiffs. It is not a search for truth in the modern sense. It is a ritual to restore the Pax Deorum, the peace of the gods. The Pontifex Maximus leads the proceedings, his face a mask of grim duty. Evidence is often based on rumor, omens, and testimony. Extracted from the Vestals, slaves under torture, a practice forbidden on free citizens, but permitted in cases of religious treason. The accused Vestal stands alone before a tribunal of old men, her life hanging on their interpretation of a whispered secret or a coerced confession. Her alleged lover faces a similar fate, knowing that a guilty verdict for her means a brutal death for him, often being scourged to death in public. The city holds its breath. The trial can last for days, fueling public hysteria. Has the security of Rome been compromised by this single woman's alleged actions? The pressure on the priests to find a scapegoat for any recent misfortunes a lost battle. A famine, a flood is immense. Then comes the verdict. The Pontifex Maximus rises. The whispers in the chamber fall silent. He does not look at the woman, but at something beyond her, as if addressing the gods themselves. The judgment is delivered. Guilty. Guilty. In that single word, the world collapses. The Vestal is no longer a sacred priestess. She is a condemned woman. Her sacred headbands are ritually removed. Her connection to the goddess is severed. She has become an unperson, a living ghost waiting for her own burial. The city has its scapegoat. The gods, they hope, have been appeased, and the final, terrible, act of the ceremony is about to begin. The verdict is guilty. For the city of Rome, the crisis is over. For the condemned Vestal, the true horror is just beginning. Her punishment cannot be a simple execution, for her body is still, in theory, sacred. To spill her blood upon Roman soil is a sacrilege in itself. So the Romans, in their cruel and ritualistic wisdom, devised a solution. She would not be killed. She would simply be removed from the world of the living. The day of the entombment is a day of public mourning and grim spectacle. The Vestal is placed in a closed litter, sealed so tightly that her cries cannot be heard. She is paraded through the silent, weeping crowds of Rome. It is a funeral procession, but the person inside the coffin is still alive. This slow, terrifying journey is her last experience of the city she once protected. The procession ends at a place outside the city walls called the Campus Celeratus, the field of crime. Here, a small underground chamber has been prepared. It is a tomb, furnished with a couch, a lamp, and meager portions of bread, water, milk, and oil. These provisions are not an act of mercy. They are a symbolic gesture to absolve the state of the guilt of direct murder. They are not starving her. She is simply being left in a place where she will happen to die, at the edge of the tomb. The Pontifex Maximus, the high priest, whispers a final prayer, absolving himself and the state of their part in her fate. The Vestal is then unbound and descends a ladder into her new home. She is alone. The ladder is drawn up. The final act is the most terrible. Stonemasons and priests move forward. They begin to seal the entrance, placing heavy stone slabs over the opening, then covering them with earth. The sounds from the outside world, the priest's chants, the weeping of the crowd, the scraping of the stones grow fainter and fainter. Inside the tomb, the last sliver of light vanishes, leaving the Vestal in absolute, suffocating darkness, broken only by the tiny flame of her lamp. The air grows thick and stale. The silence is total. Here, in this tiny stone womb, she is left to contemplate her fate, to slowly succumb to starvation, dehydration, or asphyxiation. She is a sacred prisoner, an honored priestess, erased from existence. Her alleged lover meets a quicker, but no less brutal, end. He is taken to the forum, stripped naked, and publicly scourged to death by the priests. His death is violent and visible, a clear warning to all men. Her death is silent, hidden, and psychological. The life of a Vestal Virgin was a paradox. A life of supreme honor lived on the edge of a terrifying abyss. They were the Sacred Heart of Rome, but that sacredness was their cage, and for the unfortunate few, it was also their tomb.
We've walked through the sacred halls of Rome's most honored women, but while they guarded the city's soul, another, darker order protected its secrets. Who were the eyes and ears of the emperor? The men who moved like ghosts through crowded markets and senate halls, their loyalty hidden, their purpose lethal. They didn't fight with legions on open fields. They fought in the shadows. Their weapons were not the sword and shield, but intercepted letters. A drop of poison in a cup of wine, and a dagger's quiet kiss in a dark alley. In our next video, we descend into the secret world of Rome's deadliest agents and invisible assassins. Subscribe. Know and learn that the most dangerous weapon in Rome was a whisper.